Thanks everybody for coming. My name is Lalaine Little, and I am the director of the Pauly Friedman Art Gallery at Misericordia University in Dallas, Pennsylvania, which is in Northeast Pennsylvania. And I want to welcome to our virtual artist studio visit featuring artists from our current exhibition, The Fine Print, African American Printmakers, which is on display until March 14. This exhibition is based on the notion that we tend to overlook the fine print in text, and that's usually where the most important information is contained. We hope to draw your attention to these artists who have and are still contributing to the art world in terms of their creativity, innovation, and advocacy of issues that affect us today. I want to thank the College of Arts and Sciences at Misericordia University for supporting this program and Raven Fine Arts Editions of Easton, Pennsylvania, particularly Curlee, Raven Holton, and Kaylee Atkinson, for assembling such a vibrant and rich group of art historically significant works for our students to study and write about and enjoy. We're joined by Curlee Raven Holton. Curlee is the founding director of Raven Fine Arts Editions in Easton and served as mentor and master printmaker to many of the artists that we see in the show. He's holds a MFA in printmaking and a BFA in drawing and painting, which was partially funded through a GI Bill from his military service in Vietnam. In 1996, he founded the Experimental Printmaking Institute at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania, where he was professor of art in printmaking and African American art history. He began working with the late artist and art historian David Driskell, whose print of Woman in Interior is also in the show. And in 2003, in 2003 and was appointed executive director of the David Driskell Art Center at the University of Maryland in 2014. Through collaborations fostered under Raven Fine Arts, he is able to extend the realm of artistic processes available to artists as well as educate and nurture a new generation of art patrons and collectors. Michelle Talibah is the founder and director of New Door Creative in Baltimore, which features both emerging and established artists. Michelle's training includes a residency at the Studio Museum in Harlem and a master in digital art from the Maryland Institute College of Art. Since then, Michelle has built a career as a painter, public artist, educator, and curator whose work can be seen at the Washington, D.C. Convention Center and the Smithsonian's Hirshhorn Museum. Kevin Cole is originally from Arkansas and earned his MA in art education from the University of Arkansas and MFA in drawing from Northern Illinois University. He's been recognized over the past 30 years and across the country for his teaching and his artwork. His public artworks include the Coca-Cola Centennial Olympic mural for the 1996 Olympic Games and an installation for the Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta. Danny Simmons Jr. is a painter, poet, author, producer, and philanthropist from Queens, New York, and practices in Philadelphia. He has degrees in social work and public finance, but found himself more creatively inclined, so he embarked on a style of painting that draws on African art and abstract expressionism for inspiration. In 1995, Danny founded Rush Philanthropic, which creates arts and exhibition opportunities for inner city youth and artists of color. Cheryl Edwards is a painter and photographer currently based in Washington, D.C. She began painting in New York at the Art Student League under the late social realist painter Ernest Critchlow. Cheryl infuses her work with reference to historical events, her travel experiences from around the world, as well as her social activism regarding the challenges faced by Black America. We're also going to be joined tonight by Robin Holder, who had to cancel due to a death in the family. We extend our warm thoughts and condolences to her family, and I hope we'll have another opportunity to meet in the future. Artists, thank you all for joining us this evening. And for our Zoom audience, I've scheduled around 15 minutes for each visit. While I miss bringing artists here on campus to chat with our students about their work in person through the magic of Zoom, we may have an interesting vantage point to see the artists in their own environment, surrounded by the instruments and inspirations that go into practice. So your special charge, Zoom audience, is to help the Pauly Friedman Gallery decide which of the fine print works should become part of the Misericordia University permanent art collections. And I hope that by hearing the stories of just a few of the artists, you'll be able to look at Black art with a wider lens and imagine how these works of art might enrich our campus culture. So I invite you to vote from the available works by visiting our survey. And sorry, I'm going to share screen one more time so that you can get the QR code. tinyurl.com/mufineprintvote, and there's the QR if you want to use your phone to vote. 25 of 29 works from the exhibition are available for us to choose from, so please vote. To see these works up close, students, faculty, and staff can still visit the show in person until March 14. As an academic gallery, we do not sell artwork or derive any benefit from the sales of these artworks, so if you're a collector yourself and you are interested in any of these works, please contact Raven Fine Arts Editions directly at ravenfineartseditions.com. As we go through the studio visits, please do put your questions and comments in the chat box or Q&A. If you see or hear something you like, if you're curious about something, please, whatever it is, chime in. We always appreciate a lively and responsive audience. So I will let Curlee take the wheel now.
But anyway, I'd like to express my appreciation to Misericordia and Curlee Little for the opportunity to exhibit the work from Raven Fine Art Editions. Showing the exhibition and the body of work that's included in the exhibition, especially the artists that are on the panel, is a very important aspect of the existence of Raven Editions. There are three really important aspects to the existence of the workshop. One is to create opportunity for artists to produce works that otherwise they wouldn't make. And number two is to celebrate that work by documenting the work, either through publications, through exhibitions like the one that's being hosted at your institution. This is very critical aspect of this. Also, to place the works in a collection of collectors, private collectors, and institutions. Because one of the challenges of African-American artists has been the documentation of their work, the record keeping. And it's often been said, if it's not written about or documented, it didn't exist. So there are many publications now that are currently available for African-American art and the various artists, that many of which we work with. For example, you have on our panel the work of Kevin Cole. This is a beautiful publication of Kevin's work. We've spoken about Dr. Driskell and many others. You have, I think, a Richard Mayhew in the exhibition as well, and that's one of the artists that we worked with. And the reason I wanted to share these with you is to suggest to you that one of the critical elements, as I mentioned, was the documentation of the work by these artists. It not only documents a moment in time in history and their perspective, but also brings forward discussions, aesthetics, and arguments that may not be so obvious or so present in our marketplace of ideas, especially when it comes to artists of color. We know the legacy and the history of artists of color, especially African Americans in the US, having limited access to either resources, opportunities to create works, opportunities to exhibit works, and for institutions to even embrace their work. To give you a short historical perspective on this, in the 1930s, during the WPA program, the Works Project Administration, which was established to celebrate the contribution that artists were making to American culture and history. And the way in which this was done, the Work Project Administration sponsored and funded artists to create murals in libraries. They did sculptures for bridges, a lot of great work that still exists to this day. Well, one of the challenges for African-American artists was that you'd have to qualify yourself to be a participant. You'd have to show an exhibition record. You'd have to show your work has been collected or represented by a gallery. So few African-American artists had that experience or any of those professional accomplishments. So the testimonial of this show that we're looking at now is about the many decades that have passed and the many achievements that African-American artists have made, not only in the public space and introducing the work in an educational environment such as yours, but the aesthetic development, the development of their language and of their voice. And you'll see a lot of that really present in the public today. There's a film that just came out by HBO called Black Art in Search of the Light. You might want to go online and stream that, but it is a great film in that it gives a real full perspective, not only of the historical challenges, but also the current achievements and opportunities for artists of color. But in the case of printmaking, which has a long, great American history, many European artists, Picasso and others, used printmaking as a primary form of creative expression, visual expression. For African Americans, this really wasn't introduced as a primary medium, again, into the WPA program with the Work Project Administration and the settlement houses and the community centers in Harlem, for example. Well, my teacher, Robert Blackburn, who established the first printmaking workshop in the United States, nonprofit workshop, he has a work called Organic, which is in your exhibition. And I put it in there on purpose. His work and Ron Adams, both two of the first African-American master printmakers in the country. And these artists worked with major American artists, including de Kooning, Rauschenberg, Hartigan. The list is just amazing. But little was written about their achievements and their work. So as a student of Bob Blackburn's, it was important to me to create not only an environment where artists could make work, celebrate the cultural contributions of artists of color, but also to have an opportunity to present that work and to create the multiple. The multiple is a printmaking medium that allows us to produce more than one image. And its design is to allow that image to be affordable as well by creating multiples. High quality, signed, original prints produced by these artists, created in various techniques, lithography, serigraph, collage, mixed media, is very experimental. An example of Kevin Cole's work is very experimental when it comes to creating prints, which in many ways are three-dimensional, like his paintings and sculpture. So we extend the language and give greater voice. And you're playing an important part in this at your institution by giving us a platform that allows us to express that aesthetic and creative voice. And at the same moment, you are creating history because it represents a documentation of the body of work created by these artists. So I'm gonna show you some examples in the workshop and then allow my other panelists to participate. I don't want to take all their time. So I think you can see a little bit around the studio. And this is where we do the serigraph primarily. There's a print here I'm going to show you called Spinning Glory. It's a new print that I've just began to work on in addition. And it's editioned in multiples, more than one, as I mentioned, of high quality paper. It has gold leafing on it. Each print is signed and numbered by me, indicating the sequence in which the print was made, and these are very limited numbers. And of course, the artists in this exhibition have done the same thing in the approach to their fine prints. Very limited, but at the same time, very affordable, especially for young collectors. Another example of the many pieces we've done with Faith Ringo that you can see here by the serigraph press. This is a press where screens are made that separate each unique color. And then that color is passed over a screen that has an opening of the mesh, allowing that ink to pass through, but controlling where that ink is applied. Each color is approached that way, creating a multiple colors, building up the images. And sometimes we printed 30 to 40 to 50 different colors. You can see a number of prints by Faith Ringo, and you have a Faith Ringo. I think you have two Faith Ringos in the exhibition. Mama Can Sing and Papa Can Blow. And this is the one that came on when I was the opening by Dr. Little. This is called Hands Up. So it's again, making fine prints, making them accessible, thinking about aesthetics, what form you're going to use to create a work of art, but also making that work so socially and politically relevant. Now, generally, when we think about African-American art, we think about the portrayal of people of color as subject matter. That in itself has been a political issue in the US because of our history. Well, it's no longer the primary issue, just a portrayal of a person of color. It is also now an argument about the role that they play in society. And we see this with the work of Kerry James Marshall, not only figures of African Americans, but figures in everyday life, bringing their lives to the public space, suggesting that the stereotypes that we've been accustomed to don't describe fully the life of an African American, nor the family of African Americans. So the work gives us a chance to give voice to these various dynamics and the richness of our experience. And we appreciate the opportunity to share this with you.
Thank you so much. We do have a question, Curlee, if you can take
Sure.
one. This is from Leroy Bridgewater. He wants to know, how has the perception of prints changed from the consumer over the years?
Well, two things have happened, especially when we think about the consumer that is African American, which has in the last decade really entered into the marketplace because of economics, the ability to purchase work, and also an appreciation for the work. Prints have appreciated in value significantly. I remember at the Black Art Show in New York City at the Puck Building, there was always questions about the fine print, whether it was a reproduction. And normally that is because of a lack of information. If you are well informed about art and artistic practices, you begin to understand that the fine art medium and print medium is very much a part of the language of all practicing artists. When we look at the work of Sam Gilliam, for example, I mean, he has produced almost as many prints as you see in the show here, one of his pieces, Sam, as he has of hanging drape pieces. Kevin Coe is the same. It is a language. It's been said that printmaking, if you compared it to literature, it is an essayist form of writing, where a painting and a sculpture is a novelist form of expression. But my point is that printmaking can serve a very specific purpose. It can clearly articulate a certain kind of sensibility, and it can make it accessible and affordable. So prints have grown in value. It is amazing how the prints that I know of, many of the artists that are in this show, were selling maybe at 10% of the price that they're selling for now. And the value is because of the value of the work, the reputation of the artist, but also the appreciation of the collector and the audience now. They are better educated about the printmaking form.
Thank you so much for that really instructive overview. I know you covered a lot of material in very little time, but that does help set us up for the next couple of talks. So
Excellent.
I will handle this to Michelle Talibah to talk about her work.
Hello. Thank you to the Pauly Friedman Gallery and to Raven Editions. Thank you for this collaboration that's included me in this exhibition. Curlee, you're a very hard act to follow, but I will do my best. I am an artist, curator, and gallerist in Baltimore, Maryland. My practice is engaged as an artist in mixed media painting and public art and printmaking. I'm founder of New Door Creative Gallery in the Station North Arts District in Baltimore since 2004, where we have shown and exhibited several African-American printmakers over the years. Most recently, we exhibited the work of Valerie Maynard, who is being featured at the Baltimore Museum of Art currently. So I approach printmaking in the same way that I approach painting. My history in the visual arts is varied. My early interest in fact, literature is what has conditioned me toward my career in visual art. When I was really young, I used to experiment with everyday things. Now those things would be called items of metaphoric content. That was never the idea that I had in my mind when I was working with these things. I simply saw things that were designed or created with a former purpose that could be repurposed for other use. And I seemed to be wired in that way. So I began painting. I began studying painting and when I was in school in Boston. And I decided there that, in fact, I was probably not going to pursue a career in psychology, but in visual art instead. I was living in Washington, D.C. at the time when I met a very sophisticated collective of painters known as Africobra. Africobra was instrumental in informing me about certain aspects of being an artist, and I was a very young artist at the time, and certainly instructed by virtue of our critiques that we would do on a regular basis. the nature of expression and exactly what it meant to be an artist of color. The group was established and defined by styles and concepts of Afrocentricity, fused with contemporary African and African American experience. And they were truly a vanguard for what we now know as a unique African American expression. Let's see if I can bring us to where we are with that. So one of my paintings that was part of that experience is on the left. It's entitled One. It's a 36 by 48 painting and was done during the late 1970s. You can see I was very much focused on line and color. The same is true with the next painting, Quattro. I exhibited with the Africobra collective for about 2 years, and then went on to pursue actually a quite different style. At the time, my palette and my sense of aesthetic was very much aligned with the Africobra sensibility. But I began to change, my work began to change. So we're now looking at works from the 1980s, and we're looking at the work on the left. It's approximately 24 by 28, entitled Never Knowing. And the work beside it is a diptych landscape. For a while in Washington, D.C., I worked as a public artist and as a muralist for on and off about a period of 10 years. During that period, I had a studio and met another artist and became a studio mate with the artist Terry Adkins. Terry was a master printmaker, and I unfortunately have to refer to him as the late Terry Adkins. And it was through observation that I learned quite a small bit about printmaking from the perspective of an experimental printmaker. What you see on the screen is a print of Terry's from 1982. I actually at that time was not able to actually venture into printmaking, but I did continue to paint. So that was, as I mentioned, my first exposure to creative printmaking. And with this, I was able to discern how the application of layers were achieved differently than in painting, and created a specific sense of ether in a composition and allowed for surface treatment unlike what I was able to acquire with a brush, which was fascinating to me. Moving forward, in the early 1990s, I was invited as artist in residence at the Studio Museum in Harlem. This was an experience that changed my work and altered my perspective dramatically. What you see on the left is a work that's composed of fire hose, paper, and dye, ink. I'm going to miss something because there are a lot of elements in this work. It's entitled Equiano's Pillow. To the right, another fire hose work that was done during that period is entitled Oath. As I mentioned, my work changed a great bit there. I began exploring and working more with mixed media, found materials, and did some conceptual work. So I entered the residency as a painter and left not being sure what I was. Was I a painter? Was I an installation artist? Was I a mixed media artist? Was very happy with that experience. Created a lot of work that I've tried to hold on to. I was finally able to actually experimentally explore firsthand the printmaking process in 2009. And this is an example of Going back a bit, this is another work that was a fire hose composition. I focused on drawing for a period of time. This is a small drawing entitled Always. Media is oil stick predominantly, and same for Light Behind the Door on the right. These are other examples of painting that I show to give you a sense of my palette and my sense of how I would engage space. So it was in 2009 that I had my first opportunity to actually engage in printmaking at EPI, the Experimental Printmaking Institute. So after the immersion, a week immersion of intense printmaking, I had the realization that the mental dynamic of printmaking was quite different from painting. In painting, my approach was to begin with a mental concept and make decisions throughout a sequential process toward an imagined tone and atmosphere, and structured by a composition that was often engineered along the way. In printmaking, one must think both sequentially and in reverse or reflectively. So one exciting aspect of printmaking I discovered was the ability to examine the impact of compositional direction through variable options of visual context that you can do quite quickly, certainly more quickly than you can do in painting. And I very much enjoyed and enjoy the physical aspect of printmaking, which was similar in satisfaction to working with so-called found materials, where your whole body is engaged in the process. So these are a few of the works from the first EPI printmaking series. This is entitled The Third Day. Epiphany. In 2018, I revisited EPI and worked with a series of prints I later entitled Creation Stories. On the left, rather, you'll see a series of works as they were completed. And on the right, one of the finished works. And I did revisit EPI in 2020, and I'm working on a print that is dedicated to the life and legacy of David Driskell. That print is currently still in process and will hopefully be available soon. And this is a recent example of my painting. This is a painting, a work on paper entitled Night Angel, which is the most recent work that I've completed. So while I have your attention also, I would like to mention a couple of printmakers of note. One, actually both are here in Baltimore. One is Latoya Hobbs, who was the 2020 Sondheim Prize winner for her work in printmaking, and also received the Travel Prize grant from the Municipal Art Society of Baltimore City. The second I'd like to make a special mention for is Valerie Maynard, who has a long history of art making and creative activity and political activity throughout her career. We exhibited the work of Valerie Maynard here at New Door Creative in 2018. So if you're not familiar with these artists, I would urge everyone to take a look. And thank you for sharing this time with me.
Thank you so much, Michelle, that you showed us a real depth and texture and a touchability to your artwork that I was really excited to see, and I hope everyone else was as well. Put your questions in the Q&A or chat, but while you're thinking of your questions, I have a question about the inspiration for your work. A lot of it seems to be very tactile in nature. I'm thinking of water, I'm thinking of textiles. How much of your surroundings goes into what's in front of you when you're thinking about that, or do you kind of block out everything as you're creating?
Well, I paint actually from the inside out. Um, and I'm currently exhibiting a painter here at the gallery, Bruno Matera, an artist from Guadeloupe who is exhibiting here in the United States for the very first time, who paints in very much that same way. I would invite everyone to go to the website and take a look at his work. Essentially, it means that the subconscious leads your painting spirit. And with a work like the one I have, I've shown the Night Angel at the end, that is very much from the process of not only internal dialogue, but internal listening. But quite frankly, more internal listening than dialogue. So I would say that my surroundings have been for many, many, many years quite urban, but the works that I seem to squeeze out of me lately are works that are anything but that.
That's a beautiful way of putting it, the inside out. Claude I. Elliott asks, which printmaking techniques do you prefer?
All of my prints are monoprints, and that is the result of my bearing as a painter. To have a print completed and then not go in and enhance it in some way is something I just have not been able to do. So monoprints have been the tradition of my printmaking.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. We're going to go on to
Thank you.
Kevin. Thank you so much. We're going to go on to Kevin Cole, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his work.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I want to first thank you for this opportunity and thank Curlee for giving me this opportunity as well. For me, my work has been about a number of issues, and I always start off with the concept and idea that number one, the story my grandfather told me. Number two and three, there are two events that changed our lives for forever. It was September 11th. Hurricane Katrina, and now the coronavirus. Okay, and every medium I use has something to do with a particular social issue. And when I talk about that, example was when I graduated from high school, I didn't want to go register to vote. My grandfather, who was 91 years old, lived in Terry, Arkansas. He took me to a tree where African Americans were lynched by their neckties on their way to vote. So you will always find a similar image of a necktie in my work. When I talk about September 11th, I talk about the idea of I was supposed to be in New York that day with a friend of mine by the name of Eric Mack. I decided I wasn't going to go, and lo and behold, you look at the towers being blown up. So he took a picture of a little boy holding a piece of aluminum and tar paper. So I started working on aluminum and tar paper as my protest against September 11th. And then now when we look at the coronavirus, the issues that are there. So when I talk about Hurricane Katrina, I started doing a process of mapping where I was mapping the path of the storm. And in doing that, that was important to me. And when I think about printmaking, I always tell Curlee that the late Al Loving, Sam Gilliam and I, we all were affiliated with the McIntosh Gallery. They would always tell me, you got to go do a print with Curlee. You got to do a print with Curlee. And we finally hooked up, I think in 2009. And I did a piece, and he printed it and he sent it back to me, and I was supposed to proof it, but I sold it. and he told me about that, and it's funny because every time that we've done prints together, I've been able to move them. I was with Sandy Webster Gallery, and a lot of my artists were teasing me about as soon as I would do a print and finish it, Sandy, I would email it to Sandy Webster, and she would sell it. So that's been the whole part of my work. But I've done like a lot of murals. Matter of fact, I did a 15-story mural for the 1996 Olympics. And how do you do a 15-story mural and you never touch the wall? Well, ancient Black man secret. And I'm one of the few artists that is still bending wood. And I'm gonna see if I can show you a few examples. Now, I'm not good at this at all. Yeah, my website is artistkcode.com. And it's artistkcode, ARTISTKCOLE.com. And it talks about a lot of my work and the concept behind my work, and a lot of the public art projects I've done. And I just completed a piece for the Detroit Institute, the Henry Ford Cancer Center, which is out of aluminum. And so every medium I use have to do with some type of social issue I become involved with. And the piece in Detroit is 87 inches by 342 inches by 11. And that's not on there, but everything else is on the website. And having the opportunity to work with Curlee, and the print in the show is entitled "In Times Like These." And what we did was, I said aluminum. I started using aluminum after September 11th. We print on tar paper, which is very, very unusual. And I mapped the areas where the coronavirus first started, and the neckties weaving in and out of those areas. And I did it in black and white because I wanted to show the idea of we're still dealing with social and political issues like the George Floyd thing. Had we not been bogged down with the virus, we never would have seen the injustice that was being done to African American male. So it was like a blessing in disguise, like. So I wanted to make it in black, white, and gray to show that that idea of the social and political issues.
Kevin, can you talk, I mean, and everybody, you can feel free to put your questions in the Q&A while I'm asking, but can you talk a little bit about the assembly of these pieces? Because I have my students come in and I have them bring a magnifying sheet and put it up against the work so they can see the layers that you've put together.
Well, I mean, I agree. I agree with Michelle. The thing with me is there's no one piece of mine that you're gonna see just one piece together. It's always about layers, and it's about life. People ask me about the idea of the neckties, even though that was it was a horrific event. All my titles are positive titles. They normally deal with faith, hopes, and dreams, and things and names of that nature. But I always have felt like our life is like a puzzle. We take pieces and we put them together piece by piece. And the necktie image becomes that cornerstone. But then you got these African patterns in the work that deals with hope, dreams, faith that comes from the kente cloth and the adentra cloth.
Can you tell us a little bit about the background that you're up against?
The background I'm up against the piece is a series I started in 2016 called "Stuck in the Middle," and I'm from Arkansas, so I know the Clintons, and there are no scarf shapes, and also I didn't mention this, but I started using scarf shapes in 2005. Yeah, no, I'm sorry, in 1995, I did a visiting artist at the Des Moines Arts Center, and I asked these kids to name me one major African American female who had made major contributions to America. Only one that they could name was Oprah Winfrey. So I had them to do research on Catherine Dunham, Billie Holiday, a lot of African American women. So I started integrating the scarf shape. So behind me is a piece that is entitled "No, You Can't Come Over." It's about building the wall. And you see these, there are knobs with the games that President Trump played, and they represent different occupations. So that piece, I'm doing a series called a series called Stuck in the Middle, and it's all based on whether you vote for Hillary or whether you vote for Trump. And we all know who we should have voted for.
That's amazing. So how big is that?
It's 72 by 96.
Okay. Kaylee and I are getting a truck and we're gonna go get it. Bring it over.
Hey, come on down.
Oh, you have to visit his place. He has a compound. It's a fantastic place. You have to.
Thank you.
And tell us where you're based now, Kevin.
I'm based in Atlanta, in the suburbs. I'm fortunate to have 3 studios on 4 acres of land, and I have 3 assistants as well. And all of them are all of them are former students. And one young man is 43 years old. He's been with me since he was in the 6th grade, and he's worked on every public art. I've done over 45 pieces of public art, and he's been with me on every piece.
That's amazing. What a legacy.
Thank you.
So he's going to pick up the torch after.
Oh yes, he's very
yeah.
he's very good. His name is Derek Phillips.
Nice. And is he teaching also?
No, he's not. He primarily does his work full time.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can see what makes you a good teacher. All those awards you won for teaching. I can see why. Great.
Thank you.
I'm going to give everyone another minute to ask Kevin questions, and then we will move on actually to Cheryl, because Danny Simmons is going to join us at 8, so I'll let Cheryl go first. But anyone has any questions?
I'd like to ask a question.
Yes.
So I'm an art teacher myself, and I'm also an artist, and I find that the two go hand in hand for me. I find a lot of inspiration from my students, and I hope that them seeing that I actually make artwork, not just teach, inspires them. So how and like in what ways has teaching and your students inspired you at all, or maybe even influenced your own artistic practice?
Well, I think it's a combination of both, because I was fortunate that I attended the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, which is a historically Black college. And when I moved to Atlanta, I started the magnet program at Tri-Cities High School, which Outkast came from, Escape, and all those people came. And we had and I always get questioned about, these were kids from low income areas. They were winning awards. And I found for me, the success came because we introduced them to artists who looked like them. Okay. And their inspiration, like for instance, I did my graduate thesis show. I did a series of works based on kids being killed on their tennis shoes and starter jackets. You know, how do you do something like? But because the kids would come in talking about that. My graduate thesis show was entitled "Have You Checked the Closet?" And it was based on kids being killed. And I never been from Arkansas. I never heard of a drive-by shootings. So a lot of it inspired that series of work. And actually, that series of work, the vice president Johnson Products, he bought the whole show, my graduate thesis show, sold out before it opened. But I always say my kids will sometime become my canvas for my work. But when you look at art, has been that thing that I think for me has been that inspiration, because growing up, I stuttered. And so my mom would always say, whenever I had a bad day, go make mama a picture. Okay. And that stayed with me. And I didn't realize that her saying that would really enhance me to actually be an artist. But I think as an educator, and this conversation could come about a lot because I serve as a consultant for the college board. Should art teachers be artists, especially high school? And I know that it's difficult, and a lot of people thought I always taught part-time at Georgia State, and I was on the faculty at SCAD, but I taught high school for 22 years, and a lot of people didn't think I taught high school. But because of the fact that high school teachers, they're stereotyped with they don't do any work, you know. And I just think, for me, I think if you're an art teacher, if your students, if they see you doing something, that would inspire them. Because of the idea, for me, it was important that I showed them what I could do, even if you just show them your sketchbook. And then a lot of my students, I would say, at one school I had 94% of my kids attended college on scholarship, 96.7% at the other school I taught. And when I was teaching AP, I had 100% pass rate because of the fact my students saw the fact I would introduce them to other artists that were art teachers and other artists who were doing their work.
Thank you so much. That's a great answer. I can't even match words to go back, but I appreciate that. And I have to agree. I think an art teacher who also makes art, it makes sense to me. So
yeah.
Thank you.
And then even if you don't show the work, if it's just for you. And one of the best art show, one of the best collections I saw, I was the keynote speaker in Florida Art Education Association, and then one of the teachers invited us by her home, and it was amazing that she had student work. She would buy one piece a year, and you would say, "Who are these artists?" And at the end, she said, "These were all my students' work." Magnificent collection.
That's amazing. That's a great idea. Now I got to think about how I can add my students' work to my own little collection. I love that. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you so much, Cheryl.
Okay, I want to thank the university and thank Raven Edition. Thank you, Curlee, for giving me this opportunity. I'm really excited to be here. I am somewhat of a rare bird from the other artists that are sitting on the panel. As my colleagues here in DC said, you're a rare bird because I was born in Miami Beach, Florida, but I've been living in DC for about 27 years. My mentor is Ernest Critchlow, but I didn't start out in art. I started out in undergrad school in political science, graduate school in Black Studies, law school, and actually attended the Art Student League for classes with Critchlow while I was practicing in my solo practitioner in New York. I have primarily focused on painting and ink, and printmaking became something that I knew nothing about until I met Curlee and Cuba. And I would appreciate prints, but in terms of the technique and doing things, I had no idea how to do that. So I was invited to go to EPI in 2015 and I was very fortunate to be able to ask questions of Curlee, of Jace Clark, and even Jamal Barber, who was doing internship there. I mean, because trying to translate from painting to printmaking is like Michelle explained, you have to think in the reverse and you have to think forward at the same time. I mean, I think the only saving grace that allowed me to encouraged me to embrace it is the fact that I paint in layers in a glazing faction, and I find printmaking to have that same application. So the print that's in the show is entitled "I Want to Be Free," and it was inspired from a person that I met in Cuba in 2015, Asada Shakur, who's also known as Joanne Chasmar, who's also known as Tupac Shakur's aunt. I was trying to capture the energy of her because I respected her privacy and did not take any photos of her while I was down there. And so that was the subject that I used to try to have my hand and see what my prints would look like. I took the same image and began a woodcut, which was the first time I had ever done that. And I found that I love this process. I love the wood. I love the carving of the wood. I like everything about it. And I was was encouraged to see how you could obtain such a difference with the same image. So, they will work you at EPI. And I'm sure I haven't been at Raven Edition yet, but they will work you. And so I was always fascinated by Ramir Bearden's collagraphs. So I wanted to understand that or try that. And so I had Jace talk to me for 2 hours and tell me, what to do, blah, blah, blah. And then he left me for another 20 hours. I had to figure it out. But this is one of the collagraphs, and it's just called Trinity. These are prints that I made with a printmaker down here in DC, Hendrik Septis. He's an etching specifically, but the image is from a whole body of work that I've been working on concerning water and different aspects of water as it relates to memory and identity. And it's just taken me on a whole journey. So this image comes from Talibah. I used it by gender and by race. So this is the Talibah of a Black female, but it was to bring about the understanding for people to visually that we consist of 70% water. So all this hoopla, and ignorance about race is something that you really need to think a little bit deeper about. This is a lino cut print that I made for an international printmakers exchange program based out of Mumbai, India. And it was 12 by 12. And so this was after my exposure to EPI and Curlee, but not still continuing to email Jace and Helen down here if I wanted to try to do something on my own. And this one I had to. And so it was reductive lino. I had not done that before, but these are the Egyptian paddle dolls, which are very much an influence in my work for the last 6 or 7 years. And the inverted triangle is the chemistry symbol of water, which you'll see in various aspects of the work that I do now. So I'm really geared up to want to do more, but in the technique of woodcut, I'm working on studies for a Japanese woodcut that I'm going to do within this year. And I'd like to be exposed more to the collagraph process. It's a wonderful process. It's a wonderful experience. What I'm doing now is you go 360 degrees. I've gone back to painting, and this is body of work. I think I've been painting about the dead, but I had been painting these paddle dolls since 2018, but since 2020 and what we have gone through a collective trauma, I have found myself wanting to document and honor the lives of people that have transitioned throughout that time. So this one is called Ultimate Brown Angel. And what you'll see, some of the details are the tattoos found on the Egyptian paddle dolls and just markings. This particular one is dedicated to Desarte. It's very much, Louis was a good friend of my teacher, Ernest Critchlow, and I was really saddened, when he moved on. And I put in the symbology of pharmacology because his wife is a pharmacist and my mother was a pharmacist, but I wanted to note, that, his art stood, and it stood with his family support, which would be Jaya. So my current printmaking project, I'm going to hopefully make a woodcut print with the paddle doll as the continued influence, but also to express, internal experiences since 2020. And so these are the preliminary drawings, and this is what I'm currently working on. One of the prints that I made about the Black female was featured on the cover of this political scientist book, and I was very pleased about that. So my studio pre-COVID was located at Brookland. This is when you had fun and you had interns and you could get work done very closely. We were sorting these prints out to put into my archival database. And this is where I had to make those prints for the Indian International Exchange Program. I did it in my studio. And that was 2 summers ago. And this last 2 are from the current summer when I packed up my studio because of COVID. It's a very public place. So I have to rethink. I've been talking to architects of what to do with the small footprint I have behind my house in Capitol Hill to try and restructure another studio. This is where I work. Nobody's in the house. You can't have people over for dinner. So I've converted my living room and my dining room into my studio, and I've been working. So my inspiration, I love seashells because I'm from Miami. I went fishing and I grew up swimming in the ocean, and I went to the beach, and I'd like to be around water, and my work is about water because I just need it. I need it for balance. So I keep seashells around me. I like incense and oils. I like aromatic smells. I have an art collection, small, but I collect work that I like and work that influences me. And I love to read. I'm eclectic. I love music, period. All kinds of music. I love music. So why should art be collected, created by African-American artists? I have one word to think about: decolonization of self. If you expect to have an authentic and true narrative of the Western canon, then there is no way that you cannot include the work of African-American artists. That requires you to look at yourself and face the truth. It is not about, the work should be collected because they're African-American. It's about the work should be collected because it's strong work. It has a message, it has a voice, and it has strength. And it would exemplify the truth if the complete story was told. So I know that a lot of institutions and museums are addressing this. I think that with COVID, it may become challenging, but there needs to be a correction on both fronts, not only in the collecting aspect, but also in the aspect of scholarship, how work is documented about African Americans. I think that, collectors look at things for many reasons, since that collecting artwork is a high commodity on Wall Street, and people collect for different reasons. But I would ask that for whatever reasons people are collecting work, that they consider and expanding their perspective to include, the true narrative and include work of African-American artists so that you become a keeper of the culture and keeper of the heritage of the American art story. And so I just will end to say that we all need to, Amanda Gorman told us correctly, that the new dawn blooms as we free it, for there's always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, and if only we're brave enough to be it. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Cheryl, for those words and that perspective. Really appreciate it. I will leave it to someone else to throw out the first question.
You're saying that you're giving us permission as panelists to ask each other questions?
Yes, please.
Perfect. All right. Yeah, Kevin, could you talk a little bit more about your evolution? not just thematic evolution, but the palette, materials. You're a very prolific artist, and it seems as though your palette intensifies, and you use different vehicles, whether it's a wood, aluminum, paper. Can you just talk about the evolution when you step back and look at your work, how it has evolved as the society around you has also evolved?
Well, one of the things that, hey, for me, and as I stated earlier, that every issue I face had to do with a particular medium. And I remember meeting Sam Gilliam and him saying, "Oh, you never want to be where you were on yesterday." So exploring in different mediums, depending on the issue. Example, when I talk about the idea of Africobra being lynched by their neckties on their way to vote, my grandfather told me the story how they would wrap the necktie around the rope, because if you notice, most African Americans, they considered older African Americans, they considered a privilege to go and vote, so they dress up. And so when he was telling me about that story, for a while, I just dealt with the idea of the neckties alone. And then later, when I would say that series was called The Color of Music, and it was basically on wood that was flat. Then I found out I was able to actually bend the wood and make it more three-dimensional. So then I started incorporating that aspect to it. And later, as I discovered different mediums, and then coming to the experimental workshop at first, I don't know if you remember, but I did 4 kinds of prints while I was there. I didn't sleep at all, because the idea of you and Chase showed me different alternatives with my work. And so I wanted to convey things that was, and then experiment at the same time. So then a little bit later, when I was supposed to be in New York, looking at September 11th, and a little boy holding a piece of aluminum, I'm like, wow, I can bend aluminum the same way. I can use rivets. So those things became very, very important. And now, I mean, it's like I got so many ideas. I don't know which way to go, because having the opportunity to just work and not go anywhere, and it's been, it just, I always try to push my work to another level. Now I'm getting ready to do a suspended piece for the University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff. It's going to be a combination of aluminum and tar paper. I'm adding color to the aluminum, and I also have found some sheets of copper, which is very expensive. I plan to incorporate in the work.
So it's really not about any rules. It's about what you need to convey your message.
Exactly.
There's another aspect I want to ask you about, but not to take anybody else's time, is you're a very successful artist too. Not only are you successful, haven't been a successful educator, you are a successful artist. You're very popular, institutional collections, publications. You're also a serious collector of art. You don't just make it, you also acquire it as a way of supporting the arts. Can you just speak briefly for those students that are interested professionally and how they might go forward, how you balance being a practitioner and also being in the marketplace?
Well, it all started was, I noticed with my professors, the late Terrence Corbin, University of Arkansas Pine Bluff, the late John Howard, and Ernest Davison and Henry Linton. I noticed that when I would go to their home, they had images of each other's work. They were collecting work. So I started collecting work when I was 19 years old. I started trading with other artists who I respected. And right now, I think we're well over, between both homes, at least 600 pieces. And I would say that we have at least 400 of them up. I don't like it. It's funny, I was telling the story that someone asked my wife about it, and I was teasing a young lady who was cleaning our home, and I told her that she needed to make sure that she get up on the bed. I had hid a Carol Walker under the bed, and my wife asked me, she said, when did we get that? I was like, I don't know. We know. When did we get it? But it took me a minute to pay for it. But Kara used to sit in my class at Georgia State. A lot of people don't know her dad is a great artist, Larry Walker. But I guess for me, it's like someone has said, Cheryl said, I collect work that I respect in terms of other artists. And I tell artists, normally I collect two pieces. I collect one I'm going to keep. The other one I may donate or I may give to one of my kids.
Great. Thank you, Kev. I think there were some questions from the audience, maybe.
Yes, I've got a couple for Cheryl. First, how does teaching feed your explorations? And please talk about your recent experience at the Phillips Collection. And then a couple of people are really curious about how Cheryl and other artists are dealing with the COVID pandemic, how this is affecting your practice.
Well, I'll answer the latter question first. I'm so happy that I have art, that I could get through this. I think that, at first, I think it was a very wise decision because my art space was very public, and I never I never thought that this was going to be over overnight. And I always wanted to do something in the footprint behind my house, but COVID is kind of accelerating that forward thinking. I think that it's made me a better artist. It has not been easy to go through this, but I think that the ability to focus on what you like to do, you have all this time and you can focus on it. I could pay better attention to details. And I also understood, where I was going. So I allowed myself to be able to stay in that zone to do that there were not many distractions at all. So I think it kept my sanity, and I think that it helped my work. The Phillips Collection workshop was interesting. They are being inclusive and open to community in light of what artists are going through during COVID, and particularly the artists in the DMV. So I decided to give a workshop about the research that I found throughout this time period. It allowed me to dig deeper, and as it relates to Egyptian mythology and Egyptian history of the paddle dolls and how that all correlates to water, which I've been looking at for about 8 years now. So I was able to share that with a group. They were all artists that took the workshop, and all different genres, printmakers, painters, different people. But what struck me was everybody was happy to be there. Many of us, we knew each other. It was 65 people, many people I didn't know. But what I saw happen was you gave someone, your shared concepts and your shared history of what you're most passionate about. And I found them make a piece of work within a 2-hour period that exemplified their own voices. So it was very rewarding for me. Thank you.
Thank you for those questions. I have one for Cheryl, if you don't mind. So I've been I've been watching the documentary on Assata Shakur, and she's not someone that I was aware of before this came to Misericordia. So one of the things that I noticed was that even though it's a portrait, it seems quite deconstructed, and you seem to be really focusing on symbols within this portrait. So I almost think that you can look at it from two ways, as a series of hair and necklace and lines that make up her countenance, as well as this portrait of this really seemingly tragic story of this woman who just seemed to be continually oppressed in her life here and finally found freedom somewhere else.
Right, but the whole key is, are we ever free? That's what it led me thinking about, coming, you had Cubans in Cuba who, what kept them from freedom was the Atlantic Ocean. It was water, but yet they reverenced water. So it gave a lot to think about. We're here. Do we ever feel completely free? And what is freedom? But I've been finding myself that I use a lot of symbology in my work now, because it helps me to, just speak that visual language to convey the idea that I'm thinking about.
I have a question for Michelle. Michelle as she mentioned, runs a gallery and is also a practicing artist. Could you just speak a little bit about, because I know there's some similarities with what I do at Raven, that you are not only an artist, but you're an administrator and also an entrepreneur. And I've often wondered about my own motivation. And I think part of it is if I create opportunity, I'll have opportunity. If I create a space for artists to make work, it represents a space that I would have liked to have available to me. So it's always a way of creating the possibilities that would have been nurturing for me to create them for someone else. So when you think about your gallery and it as a vehicle and how it fits with being a practicing artist also, how does that work for you?
Well, I never had a long-term aspiration to be a gallerist. But I opened the gallery when I did because I could. And I knew that it would be an opportunity for a lot of artists who were deserving of broader exposure and support. Little did I know that once I opened the gallery, time for everything else would be marginal. But I don't regret opening the gallery because it has been a forum and a platform for many, many artists who would not have had this particular platform, and it has helped them in some way. I enjoy meeting artists. I enjoy installing shows. I enjoy understanding what artists are thinking and doing. So I think that I also have the ability to present work in a way that is appropriate for the artist's work. We've recently expanded the gallery to another floor, which will double, more than double actually, our exhibition space. And this was important to do, not only because of social distancing, but because the space is a completely open space, and it will allow for things like gallery talks, film screenings, meetings, for people to have a space where everyone is in the same room. So again, if we ever do arrive at that point in time again, that space, and we will, that space will be more appropriate for gallery openings that have large crowds. There have been some openings that have been really overcrowded here in my space, which is a 1-floor intimate space between 3 rooms. But we're working on that.
Great. But it's a model for many artists, especially artists of color, to have multiple aspects to their practice, not just in the studio, but promoting their work, representing their work with galleries, sometimes creating gallery spaces and vehicles for their work. It requires a lot of energy and creativity, because in the past there hasn't been vehicles there necessarily available. And I think when you were talking, each of you made me think about David Driskell quite a bit. David, in the sense that this is someone that was an accomplished artist and art historian, a collector, a patron, someone who saw that he had to create possibilities for himself so that he can not only practice, but so that that work of art could be validated and be appreciated. There's a work in the show, Women in Interior, which David considered his opus piece. That includes not only serigraph, fabric, woodcut, Shinkale, collage. We did this in Costa Rica, San Jose, Costa Rica, where we took David, his assistant, we took students, and we went there and made work. So it wasn't only about his voice, but it was a way in which you engage in a larger international conversation, understanding that what you have to say is relevant. Now, of course, you know, David has a major retrospective that is open at the High Museum in Atlanta, honoring his legacy and honoring his career. So I think what I'm trying to suggest, especially to the audience of students, is that this material that you have being presented at your university is really important because it gives you a chance to look at the work firsthand, but also in a way to begin to understand the document and the dialogue, because a work of art is a document. A work of art is asking that you look at it and read it. And I often think about works of art. When I taught, it was important to tell students not to look, but to read the work of art. And it has something to say to you. So learn how to read it. So I just collectively, I sort of thought about David as really representing, in many ways, all the things that we're doing collectively.
That's very true.
We have a question from Gabby Miser who says, to each panelist, how would you approach a collector to acquire your work to collect African American artists?
Well, I guess for me, I don't really approach them, and I tell the I taught a class at SCAD called The Business of Art. How do you get in galleries? How do you get collectors to buy your work? One of the ways I worked at the McIntosh Gallery for a while, and I noticed how she would involve the collectors. And I tell students that people don't necessarily buy your work, they buy you. And in about, what, 3 minutes, you have a chance to convince somebody about your work and why they should buy it. And for me, again, I look at I'm fortunate. I say I'm blessed now that people they'll contact you, and the whole key is marketing. It's how do you get your work out there? Who's seeing the work? And I'm fortunate enough to have a lot of NBA basketball players like Michael Jordan, Bernard King. Those guys have been so, and Darrell Walker. They've been supportive of my work. And so I didn't go to them and say, hey, you know, you look at my work, I'll meet somebody. I always tell the story that the McIntosh Gallery in Atlanta, she was one of the major galleries here, but she was one of the few galleries handling African American artists' work. I would send her slides in the city and they would beat me back home. And I live in the city, okay? So I had a show in San Francisco at the Bomani Gallery, which was owned by Danny Glover's ex-wife. And so every time I would have a show, I would send her a invitation. To finally, she started to look at me and say, and I never would call her. She came to my studio, she kept calling. She finally came to my studio and put a card on the door. Would you please give me a call? I still have the card. Another issue I just had was with one of my collectors one of my fraternities brother, a businessman. For 27 years, I gave him a card every time I would see him. 27 years. He finally bought a piece in 2017, and he said he wished he'd have bought one a long time ago because it was much more expensive. But for 27 years, he had a stack of my cards. But every time I would see him, he would say, I need to get one of your pieces. I need to get one of your pieces. And he showed me the stack. He had one of every series I'd ever done. And finally, in 2017, he bought a big piece, but he paid for it.
Persistence is key, it sounds like.
Yes.
To build on what Kevin was saying, what I've found is that relationships are critical, relationships with people. and how they best understand what your convictions are about, what you're talking about. There are a lot of artists out there. There's a lot of work. And I think for me, it's been about those relationships and people getting close to your message and your voice, and where they come to a point where they value it. I had a occasion of an exhibition in Cleveland, Ohio. It's a one-person exhibition, and someone bought a particular piece out of a show of a swimmer. It was a figure swimming through water. For me, it was a metaphor of struggle and survival. So at the party after the reception, I asked the collector, I'm really intrigued as to why you chose that work of art. And she explained that she was a competitive swimmer when she was in college, and it connected to her. So what I did realize is that the work, it's important that the work speak
Exactly.
in many different ways. And that is, I'm very open and very flexible about that. And, you know, it depends on what your voice and what your song is about. There's always this saying for artists that you, especially musicians and singers, that you need to master your instrument and find your voice. It's not merely finding your voice, it's also finding what you're going to sing about.
Mm-hmm.
And I think to me, that is the most critical thing, whether collectors are aware of it or an audience is aware of it, that you make a commitment to your voice and your vision and you follow through on it. And I think integrity, I think audience collectors respond to authenticity and integrity.
Thank you. I would say that's the same for gallerists also. Maybe you can speak to this, Michelle, that if you are writing a gallery, if you're in charge, then you can't be neutral about what you choose to show. These are all choices that are personal expression, and you have to be responsible for that. And so before I'm going to let you respond to that, Michelle, I do want to point out that there's some questions from Cheryl in the chat for Michelle and Kevin to talk about your involvement in Africobra. And Curlee, can you tell us what kind of work you've been making? So I will sit back and let you guys tackle those 3 questions.
So you want me to go first, Kevin, or who's going first?
Michelle.
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 So my experience in Africobra was many, and pardon me, Kevin is a current member of Africobra. My experience with Africobra was more than 30 years ago. And as I said, it was a laboratory of discovery for me in terms of understanding what art making was all about, but always within the context of what is Afrocentric expression and what does it mean and how does it move and shake in the world. The group was largely, with some exceptions, Adger is a photographer. Everyone else was a painter. And we would meet periodically on a regular basis and actually bring work and talk about our work and talk about how we were perceiving each other's work and what it meant to us. So again, I was a very, very young artist, so everything was new to me. And I underestimated at the time, I believe, the value of being in such a privileged forum. Africobra was truly, as I said, the vanguard of so much that we understand about creative American expression today.
Well, I guess for me, I first learned about Africobra. I was a sophomore at University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, and the late Jeff Donaldson was one of the founders and members of Africobra. And whenever he would come to Pine Bluff, he would do a lecture. And I remember asking my professor, Terrence Corbin, what is Africobra? And he explained to me Africobra that they were like the Black Panthers of the art movement. That when everybody else was doing their own thing, they paved their own way in terms of creating art for the people, as well as they were addressing social and political issues that nobody else would address. And in 2003, I was invited to become a member. And as Michelle mentioned, that we meet every, it was quarterly, normally in Atlanta, or we would meet in DC. And we would always share our works and share, and the critiques could be very, very heated at times, because they wanted to know if you were working, what are you trying to say? What is your voice? How are you trying to say it? Not necessarily if it's social political, but it was all about getting the work done and saying what you want to say. And we just celebrated 50 years. It's the only collective group have been together that long. And when I was invited, I mean, it's a wonderful opportunity. Even though there were several people told me that I didn't need Africobra, but I felt like I needed them because I grew up reading about Africobra, and my work addressed a lot of the issues that they were addressing in their work, such as music, color, and form, and shapes.
So the question was about my work. Someone from the chat asked a question.
Yes, Cheryl asked about what kind of work have you been making?
Oh, okay. Well, I just finished a series called the Deluge series, which is a series of 9 pieces that they don't illustrate, but they speak of water as a metaphor, but water as a metaphor, the flood, the deluge, as a metaphor of crisis that we face, challenges that we face, and how we go about surviving those, or how we might surrender to those challenges and be overwhelmed by them. But water becomes a metaphor and is storming in a lot of the images, turbulent. Some individuals are terrified by it, others confront it. So it's an arrange of using works to speak about how we meet our challenges in life, how some of us are inspired by that challenge, how some of us meet the challenge, and how some of us capitulate or collapse in the face of challenge. So it's about how, the fundamental way, how we interpret things and how we respond to things. Early in my early practice as an artist, they had this political kind of overture in my work, which in many ways documented events and experiences that I was having or observed as an African American. Whether it was racism, whether it was some kind of protest, political protest, or public outrage. And then I came to the conclusion that describing the event was really not the most important aspect. Trying to get underneath the event, what motivated an individual to be racist, what motivated a person to harm another person, to get underneath the reaction. And that's been important in my work. It's a little more reflective and a little more introspective. And sometimes it's been described as not being so accessible because it's not about popular things or using popular imagery, but a little more, as I said, a little more introspective and reflective. So the last 2 pieces that I completed was Hands Up Nimbus, which is in the show. And it's not just a reference to hands up and a young Black male. And if you look closely, you'll see a small smudge of blood on his pocket, suggesting that there had been violence. And the hands up are called surrendering in the face of police oppression or brutality. And the halo is a reference to Nimbus, which was the original title of the halo and the meaning of the halo. And Nimbus was when you returned to your village heroically, whether it was valor as a military person. This is pre-Christianity, you know, so this Nimbus was placed on you as a crown of achievement. So I did that with the young boy to suggest that he had value, that he in some ways had a heroic possibility. And the matching piece is called Spinning Glory that I showed when I first did my studio talk at the beginning of the program. And Spinning Glory is, again, connected to the same sensibility, but she is immersed in her faith. And the Spinning Glory, you can see not only halo, but you can see the glory spinning on her fingertips. And this is this profound sense of self that transforms the environment that surrounds you. That what you bring to the environment, what you bring to the dynamic, has a lot to do with how you see yourself and how you see the world, and your own sense of being and confidence, your own sense of integrity and personal space, and how we can assert that into the world and improve the world and impact the world. So that's what my work has been about lately. And of course, I collaborate with a lot of artists, so a lot of my aesthetic ambitions are resolved and realized with the collaboration, building community with other artists. Hope to do prints again with all 3 artists that are on the panel. And I did a nice large piece of 4-piece print with Danny. One of the pieces are in the show. And we look forward to doing another piece with Danny and collaborating and extending that conversation, extending that community, and celebrating each other. I think it's empowering.
Indeed.
Yes.
Great.
Curlee, I'm going to ask you a question because if I've had students come in and stare at the piece with the red text and the twins behind in the Bible on the lap. And so if I don't ask this question,
Yeah.
they're going to hurt me because they're writing papers on this right now.
Yeah.
So
And
what, for me, I'm seeing text as image,
Mhm.
but the students are working really hard at identifying every single letter in this work and trying to find the deeper hidden meanings of what you're trying to tell them. So how should they regard this work of art?
You know, the text is that I wrote the text. It's not taken from any place else. I wrote the text, and that piece is really a vehicle. It was a vehicle to express the tension between 2 realities. One reality, one is born to, one is situational. For example, it's a story of 2 daughters of the same mother who was in the foreground with the Bible. And these 2 daughters had different experiences. The first daughter was impoverished, grew up with poverty and a lack of things. And there's a certain kind of psychology that you develop from the lack of things. The second daughter came later once the mother married and had more success and more resources. So she had a different life. So it suggests that there is some tension between them, 2 worlds, 2 realities between them. And the mother, unfortunately, fails at helping them realize how to overcome these tensions. She turns to the Bible rather than turns to them. So it's a certain kind of escapism, an opaqueness with the relief part of the plate, the print of the figure. But it's about this tension. So to illustrate this to you, how it is about my own wife's life and experience, to be honest with you. It refers to her life. But it was on exhibit at the University of Maryland College Park, and it was purchased by a collector. And the collector approached me and explained to me that he had just discovered some years ago, not just recently, but some years ago, that he had had a sister that was never acknowledged to his family or to him, who grew up with a totally different experience, and they were making efforts to reconcile. But the difficulty was the jealousy and tension because he was privileged and she was not. So again, it talks about the accidental birth. It's about tensions and how we might want to resolve these tensions, and also escapism. But the text tries to tell the story about having things and not having things, and what it means to have the possession of something. She wanted oils and wanted different kind of objects. This child that had only witnessed going into the department store, the oils and lotions on the shelf, but could never buy them. I remember, this reminds me of something. I was in a store once, one morning, about to catch a bus, and there was a mother with a child, and there was a coloring book on the rack, and the child wanted the coloring book, and she snatched the child from the coloring book and says, "No, we don't have time. You have to have breakfast." and she bought him a bag of Lay's potato chips for breakfast. So we don't choose these realities. These realities are what we find ourselves in. The great philosopher Chris Davis suggested that there's a thrownness. We're thrown into this world. And the piece does make some reference about situations out of our control and how we deal with those situations. I think many of the troubles we have in society right now and upheaval is because we have a large group of the population does not feel actualized, does not feel a great deal of pride in themselves, and feel they have no control over their world, and they want to assert some control over their world. It can be very frightening. So the piece is about that.
Thank you so much. My students will be thrilled. I can hear a collective sigh of,
That's
oh,
a
thank
lot.
goodness he explained
A lot to put on a piece of art, but that's you know, that raises all kind of issues, how works can be loaded and at the same time be very simplistic. And
It's wonderful. It's
Yeah.
wonderful. Well, it looks like we are coming to a close. I don't think Danny's going to be able to join us. He was supposed to join us at 8, but he probably got caught up in something else, which is totally understandable. So we'll try to catch up with him later. And for the rest of us, folks, if you have any last questions, I'm happy to entertain them. I do want to thank our guests for coming and giving us such rich personal stories for us to draw from and making this exhibition personal. I hope that our students see this as a very personal collection and a decision that everybody vote. We're going to vote until March the 14th, and then we will decide which one gets to come to the university. So thank you everyone for joining us.
I think it's wonderful
Thank you.
what you're doing and how you brought
Yeah.
all this together and that you sponsored the exhibition. And I think it's fantastic. And a special shout out to Kaylee, who helped curate and
Thank you, Kaylee.
put these pieces together. It was
Thank you
great.
all.
She was going through the curatorial process,
Thank you, Kaylee.
great anxiety, great conflict about what to choose. But she did a great job. And again, Dr. Little, we appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Very
All
much so.
right.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, everyone, I will let you go. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending. And we will put this recording on our YouTube channel, and I will send out the link and as well as the link back to vote. So
Thank
everyone,
you
thank
so
you so
much.
much. Have a
Okay.
wonderful night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.